Anyway, it's so good to have you at the table, and yeah, I am so excited to sit down and hear just a little bit about your story first before we get into the text.
Yeah, be great. Becky is super involved at Crossroads. I just found out like 10 seconds ago that she's even more involved than I knew she was involved. So you work a lot on Tuesday mornings with the neighbor care, and she also works in Noah's Ark.
Oh, yeah. I'm just volunteering in the summer for Noah's Ark, but maybe it'll become permanent. We'll see.
And Noah's Ark is what, 2 years old?
I think it's like 14 to 18 months.
Awesome. And you probably know by now that one of the big reasons we had her on the podcast is because of her accent.
Yeah, of course.
I'm totally kidding. That's not true.
There's something about Western Americans that, like, my brother worked for Alistair Begg, and if you have a Scottish, Australian, English accent, you're immediately, like, everyone's just locked in.
Yeah, I definitely see that at my work, for sure.
It's a superpower.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's like I'm an ER physician, and the number of times I've walked in and said, hi, I'm going to be your doctor. And they're like, oh, I'm so glad you're my doctor. And I think, but I haven't looked after you yet. How do you know I'm any good? Apparently it doesn't matter.
You just have to have the accent.
It's that accent bias. But so where in Australia are you from?
I'm from a place called the Sunshine Coast, which is aptly named because it's pretty sunny. Very different. Probably like a climate similar to southern Florida. And
so year-round warmth.
Yes, warmth. And it's like, so Queensland is a state, but the state is sort of the same size as like the California coastline. So I would say like actually coastline and weather-wise probably like Southern California.
Perfect.
Wow.
In other words,
So, Florida and Southern California mixed together. That sounds fantastic.
Is that near like Brisbane or?
Yes,
okay.
That's where I did all my training in Brisbane.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Yep.
So I said that wrong. Brisbane.
Yeah, that is
my
a
daughter
very,
went to Australia this past spring.
Oh,
and she absolutely loved it. She was visiting a friend, but yeah, she loved it.
Yeah, it's good fun. If anyone ever wants to go, just hit me up. I can give you all the ins and outs of where to go.
Yeah, and so Australia is Western, but what is the biggest, I'm curious from your perspective, the biggest cultural difference between Australia and America?
It's a good...
Because when I think a lot of Americans when they think of Australia are like, yeah, that's kind of like our kind of cousins on the other side of the world, like as far as culture goes.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably what I thought when I first came. And I think there is a lot of similarities. There's definitely a lot. We have this like missionary family in India that we support. The guy's called Ranjit, and I can't do accents. Mike can, but he does his accent all the time. But when he first came to stay with us, he also like does fundraising in Australia, and he did something over there. But he's like, oh yeah, that whole country down there, they're just chilling. I never heard it described like that, but I would say the bigger it is more of a relaxed culture, and it's more of a communal culture, I think, than I realized. And I think part of it is like just based in, as I've learned a lot about America and how it was founded and on being an independent nation. Like when I first got here, I would be like, oh, well, that's for the common good. And sometimes people would think I was saying like, we're communists, and I was like, that's not a communist phrase. Like that's just hey, if this is for the common good of everybody, we'll just do it because that's, it's kind of thrived
Democratic
on like
Republic.
mateship and culture. It is post, I don't know what the phrase is, but it is like
postmodern,
modern Christian. So there's not as much of a Christian culture there at all. In fact, it's a lot
very secular.
Yeah, a lot more secular. I would say more like on the same lines as the UK is with the...
Was that true of you, of growing up too?
Oh, yes. And even in your workplace and things like that, like as a physician, like I had people sometimes yelling in my face at me at work, like, how can you be a doctor and still believe that stuff? Like...
Wow.
And, not every day, but like here I haven't had any kind of opinions like that. So there's certain that it's like the same but different. Yep. And I think the culture, particularly from West Michigan, Australians are more direct.
Okay, yeah.
which hasn't always been taken
For sure.
that well since I've been here.
Yeah, I would say that's
like
true.
that.
Moving from outside of West Michigan culture, I've come from Chicago, definitely more direct, and now I have to think. I've been here for 20 years, so originally I had to think. Tryg probably thinks I should still think before I say certain things. I am pretty direct, but you have to
I love that. That's my favorite trait about Libby.
Well, you have to couch
We
it.
give each other a hard time because we're both very direct, and we can be very direct with each other in ways that we need to sometimes apologize for. But
yeah, well, and even sometimes I help Rod, like I'll do a response email and I'll just like say, yes, that sounds good. He's like, well, first say, how are you doing? And because I'm just all business, I'm just trying to tick it off. And he's like, well, you need to add a little bit of just person.
Yes, I never did that. I never did that before. And now I'm like, people.
yeah, just say what you mean.
Well, yeah. But also, like, sometimes it is nice for someone just to say, how's your day going?
Yeah,
I don't know if they
exactly.
mean it or not, but sometimes I'm like, oh, actually, that does feel nice. But I never did that before.
Yeah,
and now I'm like routinely like start writing my email and then jump up to the top and go, oh, by the way, how are you going? You know, like or something.
Yeah, for sure. That's me too.
So obviously, that's the spiritual landscape. But for you personally, like, did you grow up in a church though? Amidst that, how'd you come to faith? Like, what was your spiritual, development like?
Yeah, I think that I did. My parents had quite a tumultuous relationship. Like early beginnings were not Christians. My mother immigrated as a 10-pound pom, and so that was like they were trying to get. Her dad had 7 daughters, so they were English but poor, and my dad's family was also poor, and neither of them finished high school. And my mum was married, had 1 child, and that didn't go well, and then ended up marrying my dad. But I think the foundations of that marriage was not great, and they kind of started going to church, became Christians after my twin siblings were born, and then we went to like poor Christian schools, which wasn't bad, but also didn't always have like a good foundation, a strong foundation in some aspects of it. And so I think, and my dad put a lot of faith in the people that he met in the church who they were small places that notoriously like kind of put him, like eventually like let him down, and then his faith was gone. But I think there was key people during my spiritual journey, like, and my mum always had a strong faith, but I would say it was more like a non-questioning kind of faith. And so, but I had a few people that I think God wove into my life. So I was baptized when I finished high school because I requested it. But we were kind of the family that would like start driving to church and then everything would get yelled and we'd turn the car around. Like, you know, I would say my dad wasn't like very emotionally very healthy. And then we weren't allowed to go to things like youth group or so it was like, but for some reason I just had a strong faith from a young child. And then I got baptized when I was 16 is when I actually finished high school. So I was pretty young, but and then went off to college and kind of I always had a faith. I don't think that was a problem for me, but I probably didn't have a lot of guidance in how to make good choices or what that looked like. I got married at 19 the first time round to somebody that was a Christian, you know, which was important for me. I had a lot of head knowledge and not a lot of heart knowledge and didn't really get any kind of example on how do people respond in times that are hard. We didn't talk about any emotions or feelings and what does God look like in those spaces, because I don't think that there was ever a turn back to God in those hard spaces, you know. So I had this head knowledge I should marry someone that's a Christian and, you know, but not really a good understanding of what good love was going through into my first marriage. And then that ended when I was 32. And I think that's when I started going through some tougher times and just processing who I was and who God was and my faith in a little bit more detail.
That's awesome. So when did you meet Mike?
So I met him in, I always get the date, I think it was 2016. So a couple of years after my marriage fell apart, and I was going on a Christian surface trip So Christian surfers, not servers, like surfing the waves, in Japan. Yeah. And the good thing about that was by that time I'd come to realize that if it wasn't something I wanted, then I might have to think about it some more. I was very good at driving my own life, and I had zero desire to move to America. So there was no pressure when we met on this mission trip for a week in Japan. Like, it was just like, oh, here's this, random American person that, and so we had some emails beforehand, and then there was kind of a few light bulb moments where it was like, maybe God is directing this because I'm not, so I need to listen.
So then you fast forward, you guys get married, you move over to America. What was that transition like?
Well, I generally do things all in when I do them. So I think we met in the August on that trip. I told him I wasn't going to marry anyone until I dated them for a year. That was my plan. And then, so we were just friends, but then he had another trip. So we met a couple of times, like in different places. And then I'd emailed a group here. I thought I would move to America and just like, work for a year, see if it was anything. I was like, well, it'll be an adventure, whatever, we'll see what happens. And then I came, so that was August, September. 3 months later, I came to America, met with some emergency physicians and realized that like my plan was definitely not going to eventuate. And then Mike's like, well, what if I marry you and support you? And that's when I think I had my first ever panic attack in my whole life, because I was not probably very trusting of men, and I was very adamant that I wanted to support myself, like always. But when I realized that, I kind of had to dig deep into what was underlying that.
Maybe a defense mechanism of sorts.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I don't want anyone to control me, so I will be in charge. Because
that's how you stay safe.
Yeah, that's how you stay safe. So that's when I learned that God had a different plan, and that needed to be unraveled. So then he came in December and proposed, and so I actually came here on I'm a 90-day fiance visa. Got married.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So you guys have been married for 9 years.
9 years.
9 years. And
that's great.
Okay, so going back to your vocation, ER physician. My wife's an ER nurse, currently not practicing with young kids, but we'll go back and feels very called to that. And I know that's true for you as well. Why? Why that? Because that ER is a very specific place, and it's very chaotic. But you don't seem. My wife's the same way. She can go into those environments and bring the shalom to the chaos. Is that kind of? Did you sense that as something God had put in your life early on, that you liked medicine and specifically trauma care?
I knew I wanted to be a doctor from a very young age. Like I was one of those kids that just knew exactly what I wanted to do, which is kind of unusual because neither of my parents finished high school. We didn't, like in Australia, we don't go as children.
No one was pressuring you to do this?
We don't go to the doctor as children, like unless you're sick, and my family was particularly healthy, so it wasn't like I had but it was just, I do remember when I was 8 or 9, some missionaries coming and they were talking about these doctors, so I think that's where it grew out of, like that I was going to go and help people. But the emergency side of things was not part of my plan. I thought maybe I would train a surgical avenue, of a space that could be used in a developing nation, and then I kind of just fell into it. Like I do make relatively snap decisions. And I met a friend who was doing some exams. Then I passed the exams. And then I decided I was going to go to Papua New Guinea and do like a 3-month elective, because that was probably the biggest thing on my heart, was doing work for the underserved, and then I realized while I was there that emergency medicine gives the capacity for that. But I think, honestly, I don't know that I was bringing shalom or peace until the last few years of staying in that space. I think what attracted it to me first was I didn't think I could do it, or I wanted to make sure, when people call, is there a doctor around? Like I was like, well, I could do emergency medicine for a few years, then I'll feel confident, because just because you do the training, you don't feel. So I think that was my idea, and then I'll get into whatever I'm doing. And then, eventually I was like, hold on a second, this is, and in the last few years, particularly with my work on Tuesday mornings, but a lot of the emergency room is seeing the underserved. They're the people
For sure.
that have lower health literacy, lower incomes, lower capacity to follow up outpatient for like a large
100%.
and that's now I think where my heart lies in just realizing that with God's help I can turn up every day and bring some form of peace for my patients.
Yeah. Because the ER really becomes the primary care physician for a lot of that population.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Yeah. It's not ideal, but
it is what it is, and you got to show up and be available.
Yeah. But I would say, like, when I first started, I did not pray in my car every day before I start a shift, whereas now I do. You know, and so just coming to that realization of understanding that the only way that you can keep turning up and bring peace into that space is if God is present with you.
I'm hearing a theme in these
I love that.
big moments of your spiritual development, of God shoving you into some form of some obstacle or suffering and then developing you through that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so then Crossroads. Was Mike already here, or how'd you guys end up here?
We were in a smaller church for, I think, well, we'd been here for like maybe 4 or 5 years, I would say. So we were in a smaller church that went through a lot of changes in leadership, but Mike attended a few of the storytelling retreats with the men, and he had worked really hard in the church we were in to like kind of gain relationships with other men and run Bible studies and do different things, and just hadn't found a connection. And I think with another change in leadership at our other church, he was like, can we just go and try Crossroads? And I think for me, I'm quite a loyal person, so I was like, our kids have grown up here, we need to keep them here, like they need some consistency. They weren't really engaged though. Mike and I actually ran a part of the youth group when we had like both people leave at the same time, not that we had, but no one else was stepping into the youth group. Like, because I was like, we have to have a youth group for our kids, like this is the whole point. The first week that we came here, I realized that just it almost brought me to tears, really. I'm a bit of a crybaby still. You would think I'm not, but because I just was like, I want to go home and read my Bible again. Like I want, the desire came back. And then I was like, okay, let's change.
What was that?
The desire to read.
What was it about Crossroads or obviously it was the Lord, but that ignited that?
I think it was the sermon that week. I can't tell you what the sermon was about, but I was just like blown away, and I was like, wow, I've got to do more. I want to read. And it was like, what it was that realization that I hadn't been having that hunger. It had maybe become more of an obligation. And then I was like, wow, this is exciting. And also I met like some awesome women that I was like, oh, you guys. And like what I really loved is, as I've met a few of the different women, is everybody has these really unique, special gifts that they're bringing to the table, and just exploring and just like allowing God to be part of that and seeing how he's blossomed them in such different areas. Like mine would be in health, but like in human trafficking, or in, in women's relational events and just different things like that, where I'm like, oh wow, this is really exciting. You're really excited about that. And I'm seeing you grow into that. And that made me want to come.
That's super exciting, because that's one of our things at Crossroads, just that everyone's uniquely called, uniquely placed, a nation of priests and whatever. There is no separation between the sacred and the secular. And so when you go to the doctor's office, the ER, you are the doctor, you're praying before you go in, and you're seeing that as your worship and as ministry and as you bringing the presence of God into that place. And so to hear you say that you got that vibe from a bunch of different people is just really, really encouraging. I love that. It's almost like a guild, like we're all in this. Yeah.
For sure. And even that last thing that you said about that God reigniting that joy and hunger for God's word just reminds me of the text that we were in on Sunday in Isaiah, especially this opening image that Rod talked about of the desert. Have you been over to Israel?
No, I haven't.
Okay. But I mean, there's vast deserts in Australia. I don't know if you'd ever go out there, would you?
Oh, yeah. It's like about 100 kilometers from the coastline.
Oh, yeah. So, basically the whole country is desert other than a few spots. But, yeah, so you know what it feels like to be in desert. And I remember experiencing that for the first time. And then to have this image of God bringing out of those desert places this lush, green life. It just sounds like, I mean, that's the way that he works, and it's the way that he's worked in your life over and over and over again, usually bringing forth life out of these desert places. So it's cool to hear that, and then for it to just align so beautifully with our text on Sunday. So how have you been liking Isaiah?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I definitely have never really spent a lot of time reading it. There's a few passages of the famous passages, that you that I know in Isaiah, but I've never really intentionally studied the book before. So it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are watching, if you're listening and not watching, and maybe even if you're watching, you can't see Becky's notebook for her church, but it's so creative. It's got colors and drawings and everything. It's amazing. Yeah. I love seeing that. What's one thing that you wrote on there that you think from Sunday just really hit you or stood out?
So obviously the theme was the joy of the redeemed, or seeing creation restored. But I was kind of stuck there in the desert, thinking about, the purpose of the desert, and what we find or learn about in the desert. So I kind of wrote, number one, I think we weren't made for this world. And I think the desert helps you see that a little bit more clearly. Because you have to face whatever security blankets you've placed around you. All the, when your world comes falling apart, you don't realize what wells you have built, And so I think that when my world first started really falling apart would have been at the end of my first marriage. And I hadn't realized how many wells I had built. And so when I first came to the States, then it really fell apart. I still had some structures of support. I had a really great community in Australia, of friends and family. And so whilst obviously there was issues in my marriage, I didn't really feel alone, because I think I had really great, wonderful friends. I had very low expectations of what my husband would provide for me, so I didn't really feel like I was alone, and so it was very painful, a lot of losses, but I still had that really great support network. But then when I came to the United States,
he stripped it away.
It was gone. Yeah. And I couldn't be a doctor for the first 6 to 12 months, and I didn't know if I would be able to be a doctor, and I didn't realize how much my identity was wrapped in that. But then I also didn't really have friends or family, and Mike and I were really struggling in the first year. We had what we thought was going to be this great, awesome marriage. Really, both of us are very strong-willed people, and we listened to a lot. We pushed really hard but if you've ever been through a marriage that fails and go into another one, they say your first marriage has low expectations and high hopes. You know what I mean? You don't really know, and it's really based on what you've seen before. So interestingly, I didn't realize, because my parents, what you learn as a child is normal. Well, I thought my parents would be married forever. Well, they actually got divorced 2 months after I met Mike. They got separated. And it was a shock. But it was such a dysfunctional, I don't know why it was a shock, but it was, and then I realized my father didn't have a lot of his own emotional intelligence, security, or ways to give. He wasn't really capable of giving anything. So I guess I really had low expectations and high hopes, but I just thought, this is great. This is where I'm going, this is, and then when I married Mike, I had high expectations and pretty low hope. You know what I mean? So that difference is anytime he wasn't perfect or what he told me he was going to be, I was like, who are you? I don't know you. I don't want to be here. And that was a lot harder because I couldn't call family and friends in Australia because they would say, come home. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that,
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to, they don't know him. They don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And it was a very painful time. We had our 3 stepchildren. And so I felt the most alone that I'd ever felt, because I didn't really have friends here, like not people that knew me.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were stripped of everything.
Yeah, and I couldn't work. So that was really hard because a lot of my identity was in
so
work.
community, vocation, nothing.
Everything, yeah.
That was a desert.
Yeah. But that's what I thought about with the message. I was like, how do you live in the desert? Like, how do you maintain hope? Because we talk about that. We talk about, Rod was emphasizing that, like, don't become bitter in the desert and, maintain hope in the desert. But, like, what does that really look like when you're walking through it? And I think for me, it looked like a whole lot of different people, willingness to be vulnerable, people that came alongside me, some early women's Bible studies that I did, but not being afraid to let people know when I needed help, and choosing to stay even when I couldn't see. And my husband is an elder and I think now I'm like, oh wow, in that first year of marriage, I was really like, you're a horrible person. I was like, at times I was just like, what was I thinking? I've been tricked. I thought I'd been trapped under it, and I was like, and so all of these like crazy emotions, and it's like incredible to think now, like where we have come. We actually went to a Hope Restored, like after about a year or two, because both of us were like, hey, we thought we were going to thrive, and this is not thriving. So I think like being honest where you're at, and knowing what you want, and being willing to step into that space, which is really hard work, but also like, we have a choice to live up here, which is safe, like that superficial world where you don't necessarily let people in, or you let them in just a little bit enough to kind of feel you have someone, but not deep enough to say, hey, this is too hard.
That's good.
And letting the right people in as well, and just then controlling some of those thoughts early on, of because Satan's so desperate to make you believe those things. He will take any foothold 100%. That you give him. So I feel like that was the beginning of our desert, and then God has given us like 1,000 other. Well, with God, I don't know whether you say God gives it or we come across hurdles, but that was something else interesting out of the message, which I would love to talk about more. Just where Rod said a couple of times, God loves the desert. And I wondered, that could be taken difficult by some people.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, if you've been at Crossroads a while, you've probably heard that's a theme that is all over Scripture. Rod mentioned it's the most mentioned land feature all over Scripture. And part of that is because it's such a key, integral part of the Exodus narrative, where God pulls his people from slavery. They're literally enslaved, and he brings them into the desert, and he says, Deuteronomy 6-8, I'm going to bring you into the promised land. And in that land, there's going to be wells you didn't dig, houses you didn't build, vineyards you didn't plant. It's going to be a land flowing with milk and honey. But here's what's going to happen, is that you're going to think that it's on your own doing. And so when you get there, you're going to forsake me. So I brought you here to the desert to reveal what was really in your heart. And then what is revealed in the hearts of, I'm just doing a general overview, is that they'd rather go back to being enslaved in Egypt, because at least they had meat, those comforts that you were just talking about, than to be fed with manna and to be dependent and desperate on the Lord. And even when he gives them manna, he's like, don't store it up. I will provide every day. And then they do store it up, and it develops maggots and stuff, and it becomes, that obviously literally happened with God's people, but then it becomes the spiritual metaphor that all the New Testament authors use to talk about how God rescues us out of our sin. That it's not like he snaps his finger, but often will bring us to these desert places where he strips away all those things that we think that we need, so that when he gives us the prosperous things in our life, the good things in our life, we know how to handle them and not idolize them. Did I summarize our basic theology of the desert here at Crossroads?
Yeah, that's good. I think it's really good. And I think I hear what you're saying, Becky. It's not like he's a masochist. Like he loves for you to be in pain. But I think the key is actually in something that you said earlier, is that the desert like reveals to us that we're not made for this world. And so when we come into the desert and everything's stripped away and we realize we're really made for God's presence. But it's hard for us to realize that in places of plenty. Mm-hmm. That we were made to commune with God, that we were made for him to be our everything. Mm-hmm. But if we're in a place of plenty, it's much harder. I'll just speak for myself.
For sure.
To lean into God and all that he has to offer and to be desperate for him. But the reality is, even in the midst of comfort, we're truly desperate for him. We just can't see that.
It. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he loves the desert because it's the place where he gets to be most intimate with us. And that's the whole reason he created us, was to be in relationship with us. And so I think you see it in the greats throughout the text. I mean, you see, obviously, God's people go into the desert. You see Jesus before he enters his ministry going to the desert. We learn that Saul, before he becomes Paul, right after he becomes Paul, spends time in the desert. Moses spends time in the desert. David spends time in the desert. It's like he wants us to learn that lesson, that we need him and that he's more than able to provide everything we need when those wells, like you mentioned, start crumbling.
Yeah, that is really good because I think about that. I remember it was a Lisa Turco study. I'm trying to remember I think it was the I Am series of and that's one of the first studies I really dug into when I got here. And I think the biggest thing that surprised me is I didn't when he's talking about digging the cisterns, I didn't realize that I was being filled up by all these other things until I was made empty.
Yes.
And then I was like, and the thing is sometimes those filling up can be pretty good. If you don't, but I would say there was always a small part of my soul that knew deep down that it wasn't enough, and that it wasn't what I was made for.
For sure.
And I think but I still struggle, and I think with saying that God loves the desert just because some of the deserts that I have borne witness to have been horrific,
I bet, yeah.
And so to be like God loves the desert, I like to think of it more like God's love story and his love for us, or God loves in the desert. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, that as human beings, it seems like the only way that we can really understand that is to go through the desert and to because how do we love? How can we reflect God's love and who he is with the infinite mercy without truly understanding it ourselves? And I think until I had gone through that phase, I like to, there's so many stories where God just convicted me on the spot or afterwards, where I was like, I'm working with some of the most vulnerable population, people that have been abused from early childhood or even in their womb, and their parents have been abused. This is a cycle of just so much pain and suffering and lack of understanding I can understand why they're not going to be able to see clearly God's love, and those are the people that I'm interfacing with every day. And I was in my first marriage in Australia, I'd done my training as an ER physician. I worked really hard. I got married at 19. I did all these things, and the whole way I was always thinking, this is what I can do for God, and my husband was an engineer, and
what I can do,
exactly. And we ended up getting him a helicopter license, and I was going to be a doctor, and we are going to work in developing nations, and we were we are going to do, this is what my plan was. It wasn't his plan, obviously, but that's what my plan was. But it was always what are we going to do for God? It was never what is God, what part of the journey is God inviting me to be on, and how will, it's still an adventure, but instead it's how's God going to use me today? How am I going to get to show his love? And in that dark, dark place, unless I truly knew his love, I can't offer that hope. Without I can't offer that hope to the people around me that have suffered so much unless I truly believe it and truly know that his compassion. When Rod said, I think, he said about Jesus sighing with us, and he came he came to do something with us for our sorrows. Healing and renewing comes, but he didn't just come to bring the judgment, but to bear it. And I'm like, when you understand the depths of human depravity and what we are capable of doing to each other, and the fact that Jesus still loves us and he is willing to bear that judgment, to take it on because of his deep love for all of us. Like, I feel like that love story of understanding who he is in the desert is the only way that we can truly bear light in dark places.
100%.
So good.
And I think that relates to Isaiah, because I think a lot of times maybe one of the false beliefs that we as Christians have is that when we suffer, God is divorced from that suffering and is not suffering with his people. But if you read the language of the prophet that we've been reading in Isaiah, he's grieving over the suffering, the self-inflicted suffering of his people, right? And I maybe a way of putting it is like God is always redeeming the desert. The desert is something that he uses to redeem it. It's actually interesting, as you mentioned, that last part of Rod's sermon, which was fantastic, about just how God sighs with us. And in Christ, he takes that judgment. That is actually precisely why the religious leaders disbelieved, is because they looked at Jesus and mocked him. Like, if you have the power, if you are who you say you are, come down from that cross. And he stays. And he could have. But that's the ultimate hope of the Christian hope in suffering is different than any other religious hope, because it says that our God incarnated himself into the world and experienced the suffering that we experience, and he chose it. I mean, how do you even wrap your mind around that? And that's that's where Rod landed. And that's why I think why I've been loving Isaiah is that there's all these beautiful pictures. That whole idea of the sighing being on. It's one thing to say tears, and for some reason that image meant more to me on Sunday than even thinking about sorrow or tears or all these other images that we've been talking about, because we all know what it's like to walk in the door, plop the keys on the counter after a long day or going through something difficult, and just exhale that deep guttural sigh of living in a world that is not the way that it's supposed to be. And to know that God's going to do something about that and put an end to that feeling that we all so easily identify with is an unbelievable picture. But I'm curious too, through all of this, because you spoke on it a little bit, but like, what are some of the truths about him that you've learned through those desert seasons? Because you said that you've learned about his love.
Yeah,
I think his mercy.
And his mercy.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is that I'm not alone. I think that was the biggest lie or misunderstanding I had, was that I felt so alone.
Yeah,
that's good.
And God turns up, and he turns up sometimes in moments of prayer and in the middle of the night. You know what I mean? Like, I remember waking up feeling panicky and just feeling pain, but also like an image of God's hands just around my heart. You know, so there was moments like that. But there's moments where God turns up, like in the kind of where you least expect it, and when you feel alone. And so I feel like that. I like how you said God is redeeming, because I think the redeeming happens time and time again. It's not like this one story, oh, now I'm redeemed. Like, I feel like
that's good.
Throughout the whole journey, he's continually redeeming or bringing people up.
100%.
People that I think I'm helping, you know, my patients sometimes, or, you know, and I'm like, oh, I'm the one, like, I'm helping you. And then they say something to me. And I'm like, oh, like, to me, that's God. That's God incarnation. Whether they believe in God or don't believe in God, you know, just to tell you truths, seeing grief so understanding that grief is an expression of God's love, and we can only grieve because we've loved much. Like, so I had a counselor say that to me once.
That's good.
Understanding that God is grieving with me for my own sufferings, but also God is grieving for my patients that are suffering as well, and understanding that, like, not at a head level but at a heart level. So I think
and now we're talking about, I'm just using the metaphor of the text, like I see all of these things that you're describing as this great lush green life that is sprouting out of these deserts of your life. To hear you even talk about these things, I'm just sitting back and enjoying being on the journey of listening to how God's worked in your life. And it is that picture in Isaiah 35 is the picture of what you're describing right now. Like, to the world, that looks like death. Like nothing's coming out of that place. But you're describing all of this. It was hard, but all of these budding green lush plants just bursting forth from the desert.
Yeah. And we have seen, like, Mike and I together have seen miracles, like just stuffs, like it's, you know, I can't even explain them on the podcast really, but like it's out of like hopeless places where you're like, when you finally see God and understand that you can trust him. And it's like a trusting process, right? Like you start trusting, you take it back again, you know, but like, it's like, God is so much more awesome than we could ever imagine. And Mike and I have been given the opportunity not just to, you know, I got to help raise his 3 children. The last one's just starting college this year. We got to have a refugee foster son from Guatemala who he has his own story to tell, but it was traumatic. It was unexpected. It involved an ICE arrest and then God turning tables, but we had to trust him the whole way. And it was, but seeing how God does that, we got to walk really closely with one of our neighbors on Tuesday mornings and just seeing how God turns up in their life because we chose to listen. Like, you know, you have these plans that you want to do all this for God, but then actually when you're in the desert and when you understand who he is and how big and how amazing, how much he loves, right? Like, and then you also understand in that desert what you're not as everything is stripped away.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Those are the twofold purpose of God in the desert. Is not.
You understand who he is. You understand what you're not. But then you realize what it looks like to do this journey, and you don't have to be afraid of the suffering anymore. I think that's the big thing. You don't have to be afraid of the darkness because you know that God will restore it. You don't know the timing, you know, we don't know. But like if you go through and I think that's probably why, right? Like is that before that, you're always trying to secure everything in your life to make it like this perfect picture of we're going to do this and that and it's going to be great. And like, how many children are we going to have? And what are we going to, you know, like that. And it needs to be like these decisions that we are making. But when God's kind of swoops in a space of desert, and I honestly, I believe at the depth of my being, if there was an alternate way, God would never want people to be in the desert. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I don't.
If there was another way.
If there was another way, you know, but he is.
It's almost like what Jesus said, like in the garden, like if there's another way, like don't make me go through this. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think he would ever, like, I mean, it wasn't his desire. He built the Garden of Eden.
100%.
You know, like that's what he desired for us. And like, but it's only if you've tasted the goodness of God. 100%. And like that's what David says, right? Like he's tasted the goodness of God. Yeah. And unfortunately it seems to be that it has to be through a desert
100%
for us to get there. You know, and everybody's desert is different.
That's right.
And I wish people would stop comparing their deserts.
100%.
You know, because it doesn't actually matter what the desert.
It's all relative.
It's painful.
Suffering feels like suffering. 100%.
Yeah.
I love, and I mentioned this in the last podcast, but I'm reading this. It's like 93 pages. It's Elizabeth Elliot. She was married to Jim Elliot, who was murdered by the tribe that he was going to witness to. Got married
You should
again.
talk a little bit about Elizabeth Elliot, just briefly, just give a little bio, because it's amazing, but not that many people. When I first came to Crossroads, I started leading a small group of young college-age girls, like Lindsay Amy was in it. They didn't know Corrie ten Boom. They didn't know who Elizabeth Elliot was. Like some of the great Susanna Wesley, like some of the great female like leaders of our faith.
Give us the bio for Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Elliot she went to actually met her husband, Nate Saint at Jim Elliot and his friend Nate Saint at Wheaton College. They got married and they went to Ecuador to some tribes, very unreached people groups.
They already had children.
Yep. And then she writes Through Gates of Splendor, which is a great book. But the story of them trying to reach slowly this tribe, at least just make contact with this tribe. And her husband ends up getting killed by the tribe before they even really have a chance to talk. But then she goes back after she comes home for the States for a while, comes back and continues as a single mom with some other people to reach out to that tribe. And eventually the tribe becomes exposed to the gospel through them and become Christian. But she sacrificed, her husband died because of that. So she's
Then
not
she got
alive
married
anymore.
again.
Yeah, she got married again. She's not alive anymore. But her story of going through the desert, a pretty big desert, and then returning and being faithful and staying true to what God had called her to in spite of the cost is intense. So
Then when she got remarried, God threw her in another desert because her second husband, within 3 years, I think, of getting married, diagnosed with cancer and went very quickly. So she'd been widowed twice. But anyway, so this book was just put together by one of the people that she had greatly influenced by. It had never been published, and it was a series of talks and lectures that she gave for a certain group. But the title of the book, which is just her talks transcribed, is called "Suffering is Never for Nothing." And in the chapter that I was reading last night, she was talking about comparing sufferings, and she's like, and how that doesn't work and she's talking to the group like, I have no idea what you've suffered, and you might think that your suffering is nothing compared to my suffering, after she shared her story. But then again, I don't know what it was like to go through your suffering. And so she said, well, I wanted to come up with a common definition of suffering. And she said, here's my simple definition. Suffering is having what you don't want or wanting what you don't have. And she goes, I think that covers everything. And then this is what she says. Now, can you imagine a world, though, for example, in which nobody had anything that he didn't want? No toothaches, no taxes, no touchy relatives, no traffic jams. Or by contrast, could you imagine a world in which everybody had everything that they ever wanted? Perfect weather, perfect wife, perfect husband, perfect health, perfect score, perfect happiness. Malcolm Muggeridge said, supposed you eliminated suffering, what a dreadful place the world would be, because everything that corrects the tendency of man to feel over-important and over-pleased with himself would disappear. He's bad enough now, but he would be absolutely intolerable if he never suffered. Muggeridge gets at the heart of what I want to say today. It's never for nothing. And then she said, now, how do I know that? Because the deepest things that I've learned in my own life have come from the deepest sufferings, and out of the deepest waters and the hottest fires have come the deepest things that I now know about God. That was just a little section. But that Malcolm Muggeridge quote, where it's like, okay, now that the world is the way that it is, could you imagine a world with sinful human beings who never had to suffer? How intolerable we would be, because you already said it. In the desert, we learn about who God is, but we also learn about who we're not.
Yeah, it's good.
And you talked about control, and you talked about, and that's exactly what God's doing in the desert. Like, you think you're in control, but you're not. And that's why I don't want you to store up, because you storing up manna is you taking control of something that I'm providing for you. And by you doing that, you're relinquishing your faith in me to provide for the next day. Anyway.
Yeah, it's good.
But anyway, the book is amazing. She's an unbelievable writer. Her story's amazing. There's some giants out there. Yeah. So anytime we can kind of shout them out. And Corrie Ten Boom.
Yeah, there's some amazing giants.
Yeah.
I love in the beginning of Isaiah here, where it talks about the desert blooming, the parched land becoming glad, the wilderness rejoicing and blossoming. It goes into verse 3, and it just, as I was just reading this, I was thinking of you. Strengthen the feeble hands, steady the knees that give way. Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, do not fear, your God will come. He will come with a vengeance and open the eyes of the blind and the ears of the deaf. And I know Rod talked about, at the very end of his sermon, Isaiah 32, when it says, a king will reign in righteousness and rulers will rule in justice. Then each one will be like a stream of living water, the shade of a great rock. And that's what you are, Becky, in those spaces where you are bringing the presence of God into those. I feel like you're the expert probably here on suffering. Your own life has had some suffering, but even what you watch in the ER, like the impossible circumstantial suffering, like you said, like the generational abuse and the things that just feel beyond, like, God, anyone unraveling, really. Or you'd have to change the person's almost DNA to like put an end to the suffering, and being in that space of you being a fulfillment of Isaiah 32, that you are the shade of great rock there. You are a stream of living water in those deserts. And Isaiah 35, you're strengthening the feeble hands. You're saying to the knees that give way. You're just God's hands and feet in that place. So I'm just grateful for and what he's brought you through, because like you said, you couldn't do that if you didn't know.
No. And I think that most of the time it's my hands that are feeble. You know what I mean? My knees that are feeble, my hands that need strengthening. Like, but I needed to be brought to the place where I understood that.
Yep.
And I think that, I really think it's what Tryg said. It's understanding who God is in the desert, in that, like when people have had so much suffering and so much, like there is so much hurt, so much anger against God, or like a lot of times people aren't willing to like you have to peel back the layers because it's really hard to understand why God would allow the depth of suffering and pain that these people have been through. And what I see is the generations of pain that they've had. It's not like, it's not like that mum was just a horrible, but like I think when I first was as a child, like I remember hearing that story and thinking, Jesus, you could have just got off the cross, showed him you could do it, and just stuck yourself back up there if you had to die.
Exactly.
Like this was my brain.
For sure.
What I didn't really understand is like the amazing compassion and mercy that God has, despite all of the Old Testament, that he would give his son in place of us, but in place of all of us, in place of, and it's like, well, how is it right really? Like if I'm looking after a child that's been abused or suffering or not, not being cared for like we would want them to be cared for.
Yeah.
And then I look at the parent and I suddenly understand that like they also weren't, it's easy to be mad at that mum, but like it was a sin that entered at some point that just has caused generational choices. That's right. That people, if they'd been exposed to a different space, they wouldn't have done. You know what I mean? So in reality, I don't really want that mum to suffer because she's broken. Like hurt people. And yet like this is the beauty of it, is like I'm like, okay, as a child I didn't understand that. But now I understand, like Jesus came on that cross to suffer so that no one would bear that, And I mean, is there pure evil in the world? There's evil, but are people evil? Like we are made in God's image, right? But then through choices that we make, that other people make for us, we're exposed to bad things. We're either living in our true self or our false self. But God understood that, and that's why he sent his son. Like that, when you understand the depth of God's
100%.
love, that enables us to be like, oh, I can have compassion. I can be in this space with you.
And that's what redemption, resurrection, and glorification point to. It's not that we are escaping this world. It's not even that we're escaping our bodies, but that there was a way that we were designed to be, and the way that creation was designed to be, that God is going to redeem, resurrect, and then glorify. And the process of glorification is the restoration of the way that we were supposed to be, which is exactly what you're saying. And I think that that's important theologically, so that when we talk about sin, we talk about it like an infection, which we're going to be in Romans in the fall. Paul will unfold that and unpack that in ways that are, have been beyond people's pay grade for a long time. But anyway, where was I going with that? But this idea that I think there's some Christian traditions that have, because they hate sin so much, have ended up hating the person, or hating our bodies, or talking about being a human as being a vermin. It's like, no, we are made in God's image. There's something good there, but it's been tainted. It needs to be restored. And that's what God uses desert for. And it feels counterintuitive as human beings.
Upside down.
But it's right side up, and it's the only way. And that's also why, going back to Jesus in the garden, it was like, this is the only way. I wish there was another way. Lord, if there is another way. But at the end of the day, I have to go through it. I have to go into the tomb before the resurrection. But
that's good. Becky, thank you so much for sharing your life with us, really, and your journey, and then exposing us to your everyday ministry, really, your congregation at the hospital. Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. It was a joy to actually hear,
For sure.
to hear your heart in that. So, yeah, you were raw, vulnerable, and that was so good. Such a good suffering.
Yeah, this is what we would hope for. I think that I'm always shocked about there's going to be little particular parts of what you shared today that will minister in a really
100%,
profound way
yeah.
to people that you'll maybe never meet. But the hope of adding the cameras is that if they do need to come talk to you, now they
See you
know.
at church, yeah.
Now they
They're like,
know
oh, that's Becky.
That's
Yeah.
Becky.
Yeah.
So, or they can just listen really closely, and if they hear your accent.
Yeah,
across
you're
the
not too hard to
yeah.
find.
Anyway, so
Unless
thanks for
there's
being
any
with
Australians at Crossroads, let me know. I'd love to say hi.
I haven't.
I don't know if there are.
I don't know if there
I don't know
are.
any other ones, but there could be.
Yeah.
Shout out.
Shout out.
Shout
That's
out.
right.
Shout out.
Come meet Becky on Sunday if you're Australian. Anyway, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Becky.
All right, we love
Appreciate
Crossroads. See ya.
Yeah, bye.